Hello, Duke fans. This is episode 266 of the Duke Basketball Report podcast. I swear, we actually talk about basketball, but it seems lately we haven't had any basketball to discuss. And if you're looking for this episode to be about basketball, sorry, it's not. It's Saturday, June 2nd, or not June 2nd, January 2nd. We are in 2021. And Duke,
what month is it? What month is it?
It's, you know what? I'm just trying to fast forward through the season, I guess. Duke was supposed to play Florida State this evening, but that game has been postponed due to COVID issues in the FSU program. There's a lot of other stuff that within that game that we have to talk about. Before we get into that, though, Donald Wine here, your host for this episode. Happy New Year to everyone. I have both Sam Klein and Jason Evans with me this morning. Sam, we missed you the other day, but it turns out you didn't really miss a thing.
Yeah, I was going to say, I listened to the episode in preparation for the game. Today's Saturday. The game was supposed to be tonight. I listened yesterday when you guys put the show out that I couldn't be a part of, and so I was all ready. I felt like I was ready to watch the game. I had all of your analysis, which was great, and I had all of Jason's rants, which were also great. And lo and behold, no game. So I'm prepared with all this knowledge that I can't use.
Well, we're going to use that knowledge in just a second. But Jason, good morning to you as well. Again, our rant on what was that, Tuesday or Wednesday? Or was it Wednesday or Thursday? I don't remember what day it was. It seemed to be, it was way too far in the past because now it's all for naught. But I do appreciate your rants.
Thank you so much. Yeah, you can take my comments from, I think it was Thursday, Wednesday,
yeah.
Whatever day it was. Take my comments, reset them, play them again. I am now in the put the season on pause mode. And by the way, folks, I want everyone to note, we work really hard. We work really hard in the off season to come up with filler content, stuff that'll get us through the time when we don't have basketball games. And this gig is supposed to be easy when Duke is in season. You watch the games, you come on, and you talk about it. Come on, guys. Can we play a game so we can have an easy podcast, please?
I mean, you would think that this is 2020 with the way this year started, because we're starting the same way we ended last year, which is with no basketball. So let's just get right to it. We'll bring everybody up to speed. Last night, again, this is Saturday, January 2nd when we record. So last night on New Year's Day, in the span of about an hour late during the Sugar Bowl game, we first received word that Coach K did not make the trip to Tallahassee for the game. He and Mickey K were both quarantining after coming into close contact with a person outside of the program that tested positive for COVID. So first of all, we hope both of them are okay. We hope that they test negative and that everything is on the up and up for them. We're behind them with doing that. The team did make the trip to Tallahassee without them, and they were prepared to play with associate head coach Jon Scheyer leading the team in Coach K's absence. Then about an hour later, all of that came to be for naught as the ACC announced that this game had been postponed due to COVID issues within the Florida State program. That is the second straight game this week that has been postponed due to COVID issues. I think at this point, we now have more games postponed than we have played this season. So
actually, to be accurate, so we should have played 10 games at this point.
And we've played five.
But we've only played 5. So technically we've had 5 postponed, canceled, whatever you want to call it. But it's sort of 6 because one of them got the Gardner Webb game, which was supposed to start the season, got rescheduled, and then the reschedule got canceled. So I guess, are we batting 500 or less?
We're not batting 1,000. Let's put it that way. We knew we weren't going to bat 1,000, but I mean, even baseball, we have trouble getting a contract with this lineup right here. But so really, at this point, if Duke plays on Wednesday against Boston College, and we can only say if at this point, it will be 3 weeks between games for the Blue Devils. They last played against Notre Dame on December 16th. So, Sam, since you weren't on the last episode, I know you have a lot to talk about with regards to this. So what do you make of all of this?
The big picture that I want to start with is the rule that the NCAA, I think, instituted at the beginning of the season that you have to play, I think it's a minimum of 13 games to make it to the NCAA tournament. And I liken what's happening now for the canceled games to every team is currently playing Yahtzee, which is a game of mostly chance and a very tiny amount of skill where it's basically just luck, where you roll the dice, you pick which of the Yahtzee types you are going to take, for each turn that you take, and you're trying to maximize your point total. Most of it is luck. A little bit of it is knowing the numbers and playing them correctly. That is pretty much where we are with every program in college basketball at this point. They are all rolling the dice every week to see whether or not they have COVID or whether their opponents have COVID. And then going forward, they can do a little bit to isolate themselves, to make sure, like Duke is doing, like many programs are doing, to keep themselves away from other people in their communities to prevent the spread. The universities are doing this. The athletic departments and the teams specifically are doing this. But mostly it's just a game of chance. Duke has now had 2 of their first 3 conference games canceled or postponed, I guess, because of COVID issues at the other program. The first being Pittsburgh and the second being Florida State. Is Duke going to get to play 13 games before the end of the season? I don't know.
Hey, Sam, actually, I've done the math on this. So we have 17 games left on our schedule, technically. Not including the ones that have been postponed but not canceled. So technically 17 games left. We need to play 8 of those games to get to 13 games because we've only played 5. So that's, we'd have to play right at 50%. And we've canceled right at 50% of our games right now. Or not canceled, postponed, however the hell you want to talk about it.
They haven't been played as scheduled.
They have not been played as scheduled, correct. So if we continue on this pace of getting about 50% in, we will get to exactly 13 games.
And 13 is way less than teams normally play in a regular season. When they announced that number, I was like, all right, I get that they're putting that limit in place, but no one's actually going to get close to that limit if teams and programs are doing what they need to prevent spread. Maybe they'll have a week of games canceled here and there, so that might add up to 2 games. A week is notionally 2 games. 2 games here, 2 games there, 2 games there. If you cancel 4 weeks of the season, you're only losing 8 games. And it's possible that Duke is not even going to make it to that bare minimum threshold.
So, Sam, I'm glad you started with this because that was literally the first set of notes that I had about this. Because looking at the comments, first of all, I'm taking out the wild crazy ones because they're wild crazy. We know
we're not talking about the big time haters, right?
Yeah. Okay. No. So, but the thing about it was the number 13 came up a lot because simple math, right? We've played 5. We need 8 to get that minimum. And as Jason said, we have 17 games left that have not that are still on our schedule, not counting the 2 that have been postponed this week. So, my crazy math says that you have to do about half of those games, play half of them to get to the minimum number. And so far this year, as we just mentioned, we've played half of our scheduled games. So the issue is, and we talked about this when the schedule came out back in October, the ACC has not built in a lot of wiggle room with a lot of cancellations. We're not the only team that's getting all these cancellations. So the question is going to be, how do they make this schedule work with the compressed time frame that we have left and play all the games that we are already going to play? By my count, I think we only have 2 weeks, or 2 weeks where we have only 1 game. So, and that doesn't necessarily line up with our opponent where they may have 2 or 3 games already that week. So it's not like we could just plug a game in right there. So this is a real big problem. And as we've been saying before, they didn't address this back in October, and now they're going to have to deal with it.
You guys remember a few years ago when Duke had a game against North Carolina postponed because of a snowstorm? The roads were so bad. This was the Snowmageddon in the Triangle. The roads were so bad that Duke didn't want to take the short bus ride from Durham to Chapel Hill. There was the silly section of Twitter that was criticizing them for it, but everyone else was saying, get off the roads. You should not be traveling in the Triangle tonight. It's dangerous. We don't have snowplows, etc.
It wasn't that we were like, hey, this is unsafe. It became unsafe because the bus never made it. So the bus was coming to pick the team up and they never made it. And the team was like, look, this is clearly an issue.
Unless the basketball team had acquired cross-country skis that afternoon, they were not making it to Chapel Hill. So they postponed the game by a week or 2. And it was a whole thing where Duke was going to have to play 3 games in 5 days. Oh my God, they're not going to have enough time to rest. They're not going to have time to game plan. It's going to be such a disaster. It worked out fine for Duke. I think they ended up winning the game, which is sort of beside the point, but everything was fine. And this was one game where there was lots of going back and forth. How are they going to fairly reschedule this? We didn't build the schedule to have these extra off days like you were talking about, Donald. And now Duke's already had 2 conference games postponed that they're going to have to make up. And there isn't, Jason, I think at the beginning of the season was talking about, they've built in these extra days in the schedule to work this out. That doesn't work if we're rescheduling 4 or 5 or 6 games for every team, because they're constantly going to be having to fly back and forth, get only a day off, maybe not have any days off to get all these games in. And I just don't know how feasible that is.
One of the things to note about the ACC schedule was there were lots of weeks where they said, this game will be played on Tuesday or Wednesday or Thursday. And I fully believe that is because they're going to try to make up games by playing them like one game on Tuesday, and then they'll add in a game on Thursday. So it's sort of a flexible schedule.
But they've already, at least for Duke, we had a few of those already. Those have already been scheduled for different dates, because those dates, I know we were talking about it, it ended up being for TV purposes. And a lot of those Tuesday or Wednesday type of deals have already been scheduled. This BC game was one of them. Last week, the Pitt game was supposed to be one of them, but it ended up being postponed.
Right, but I'm just saying it gives them some flexibility that they may try and do this. But the reality is, if they are smart, they will do what I've been saying for several days now. Put the damn season on pause. There is no magic to playing the NCAA tournament in the month of March. There just isn't. And we should put the season on pause and push everything back, give teams time to recover from this. I mean, my God, again, I said this the other day, but students haven't even come back to campus yet. How bad is this going to be when students come back to campus?
Jason, you were talking about how there's no magic to them necessarily playing in March. They could play the tournament in May or June, and they would still get most of the same effect. Look at how hard college football worked to get the college football playoff to stay at its normal time, right? They played the 2 semifinal games yesterday. Today's the 2nd. They played the 2 semifinal games on the 1st, which is as scheduled. And to do it, they had to include a team in Ohio State that only played 6 games prior to the college football playoff. And if you want to make a comparison to what's going to happen to the basketball tournament, look at all the teeth gnashing that went into Ohio State getting chosen over some other teams that I don't want to get into the merits of different college football programs and whether they deserve to be in the top 4 or not. But look at how much anger there was about that decision making, and then take that out to a basketball season where some teams are only going to play 13 games, some are going to play 15 or 20 or 25, and having to seed a whole 68 team tournament out of that. The uproar and the anger is going to be so much louder and coming from so many different disparate voices around the country that the NCAA is just going to feel an immense amount of pressure to get the thing right. And they're not going to, because in a normal year, 3 or 4 programs get upset about where they got sent or if they made the tournament at all. This year, everyone's going to be upset. Everyone's going to say, we didn't get to play all these games, or we didn't play enough games, or we're tired because we've played all these extra games and done all this extra scheduling. No one's going to be happy come tournament time with either the way that they were seeded or how they got there or the state of their team versus their opponents.
Also, Sam, you mentioned college football. The one thing that you forgot is that to do all of this, the NCAA moved the Rose Bowl from the Rose Bowl to Jerry World. Why? Not because it was safer there, but because they wanted to have fans, and the players and the teams wanted to have their families come. And so they basically said, okay, we're going to make sure that we can have our families there instead of playing it in LA where no one can attend any football games or any sporting events for that matter. So they're moving things, but they're doing it for money involvement, and it's not necessarily for the safety concerns. And mind you, that is a big deal because the Rose Bowl has only ever not been in the Rose Bowl one other time. That was in 1942 when it was at Wallace Wade Stadium because of World War II, and they didn't want to have any sporting events on the West Coast. So that was a major deal that they did that, and they didn't do that for safety concerns. They did that for money.
Hey guys, so I got a question for you. Duke was scheduled to play 8 ACC games this month, the month of January. What's the over-under? If I said to you 3, are you going higher, or do you think Duke will play more or less than 3 games? I'll make it 3.5. So not exactly 3. 3.5 is my over-under. Are you going over or under 3.5 games this month, Donald?
I'm going to go push. Why am I going to go
3? You can't go push on 3.5.
Here's why.
The game's going to get canceled at halftime.
Yes. You know what? I honestly think that would happen if someone was like, because we've seen this happen in other games. Like we've seen where in football where guys like, hey, in the third quarter, like, oh, by the way, homeboy over here that's been playing the whole game, he tested positive in the first quarter, so he's got to go. And if that happens in basketball, they're shutting the game down.
Donald thinks that what's going to happen to a Duke game is what almost happened in the final game of the World Series when Justin Turner got pulled out of the game in the 8th inning. If Justin Turner's positive test had come back in the 3rd inning and he had gotten pulled out, and then there was enough time during the game to have discussions about it, you could have seen him get pulled in the 2nd or 3rd inning and then the game get canceled in the 5th. And then they wouldn't have been able to come back and play for a few more days. So that's, I think, the scenario that Donald is looking at.
And also you have Des Bryant in the Ravens, and a couple of times where we've seen guys they're like, oh yeah, his test was inconclusive, he can play. And then in the 3rd quarter, by the way, he shouldn't have been playing this whole time. It tested positive.
Jason, I thought that your initial pick of over under 3 games was, as you were setting up the scenario, I was thinking it's going to be 3 games. And you said 3, and I was going to say push to that. So now that you've gone 3.5, I'm going to take the under and say that Duke is only going to play 3 games. We don't think that anyone in the Duke program right now is testing positive. We know that Coach K, as you mentioned at the top, is under a quarantine protocol with his wife. But as far as we know, the team can still function with Coach K staying home for a couple of weeks if he needs to. If he's actually sick, or if other members of the program are sick and they have to sit out, that then takes 3 games possibly down to 0 or 1, because it takes a while to get everybody healthy again and back testing negative. That can take a couple of weeks in and of itself, ignoring everything that happens with opponents.
Think about this scenario. So let's say, when does the ACC start jumbling games together? And by that, I mean the Virginia Tech game was canceled today, Saturday, as well. The Duke Florida State game, not the only ACC game off the schedule today. Virginia Tech also off the schedule because of a positive test within the Virginia program. Not one of the players, but I believe one of the support staff. When does the ACC start to go, hey, you know what? Duke is clear. Florida State is not. Virginia Tech is clear. Virginia is not. Let's have Duke and Virginia Tech play. Hey, Duke, we know you're down in Tallahassee. We know you flew down to Tally. Hey, jet up to Blacksburg. Get up there really fast. I know you haven't prepared for them at all, but go ahead and play Virginia Tech now because you 2 teams are both able to play. Do you guys think that scenario ever starts to happen? And how much will that make Coach K's head explode? Because he hates that kind of thing.
First of all, I don't see that happening as it did in football, because football, they were giving teams a few days. We had to go through it with the game against Virginia being moved up 2 months to be played when they'd had COVID issues. But I think when it comes, and it's easier to do that in football because guys don't travel. They were making those arrangements earlier. But I think the only way I could see that scenario happening is if 2 teams are in the triangle area or just in North Carolina, right? If, we're supposed to play Wake and someone else was supposed to play NC State, and, those 2 games got postponed, and all right, hey, Duke, you're still in Durham. Whoever was playing NC State, just travel up to Durham and play them instead. I could see that happening, but the problem is I don't know where on the schedule that would be feasible to do all the time. And again, it would have to have the stars line up where those teams happen to be in the same area. I don't think they're going to have teams jumping back on planes to jump back to somewhere else on, less than 24 hours notice like we would have here. Because some people were saying, hey, just have them come home and play North Carolina. I'm like, yeah, sure. The ACC is never going to do that. Why would they have that marquee game in January? There's a reason why they schedule those games. So I don't see that happening as much in football or in basketball, because a lot of the traveling is just these are happening last minute. It's not like they're happening days in advance.
Given Coach K's general reluctance about playing this season, you could see a decision like that we know would anger him, causing him to just take his ball and go home and say, look, we can't play under these conditions. We can't send the guys out there without getting to practice for the specific opponents. We can't be forcing our staff to be traveling all over the place and doing these things at a moment's notice, just so we can play some games that at the end of the day really don't matter for anything. So I could see Coach K being fed up with it. What I haven't really seen yet, and maybe you guys have heard more quotes about this, is other ACC coaches who are getting frustrated with the way that the schedule is turning over and changing so much, because I don't think that Coach K alone would cancel the ACC season. But if 4 or 5 coaches, among them Coach K, Roy Williams, Leonard Hamilton, Jim Boeheim, kind of the old guard guys, if they are all together and saying, this is silly, why are we doing this? Then you could actually see the season getting paused or postponed in some way.
It's funny you mentioned that because I've noticed this, and you guys tell me if you've noticed this as well. I've seen not a lot from the coaches in the ACC. Unlike what we were hearing before the season was starting, a lot of them are very outspoken and vocal about having the tournament be, all 351 teams that are eligible, whatever it is, and having, the ACC being a ACC conference schedule only. They had been very outspoken about that, but now they're very quiet. And it's interesting because Coach K is still speaking out about stuff like this, and he's taking all the flack for it. Duke is taking all the flack for it. And it seems to me that because their silence is an action, but also their silence is letting Coach K be out in front of this. I feel like, yes, Coach K is probably the person who can move mountains most in college basketball, but you can't move mountains by yourself. You need someone to help you. And the problem is I don't see these coaches backing him up. They quietly, they're kind of like, yeah, Coach K is right. He's been saying this all year. Like Boeheim has been sort of like saying, yeah, guys, don't take it out on Coach K. It's not because A, B, and C. He's been saying this the whole time. But they haven't been saying, I agree with Coach K, or saying, Coach K is right, or, hey, we are all in the same position. They're just kind of letting him stand out front on this, but he's staying out front alone. And even the greatest of all time needs to have backup. And I'm surprised that the ACC coaches haven't been more outspoken one way or the other on this, because the only ones we hear about are the haters. And outside of the conference, we haven't heard from the ACC coaches yet.
I want to point out really quick something truly absurd that has happened with all of this, which is that Duke traveled to Tallahassee for the game. Duke got on a plane. They left their bubble on campus. They got on a plane. They stayed in a strange hotel for nothing. They did not get to play Florida State. And Florida State, by the way, has a little bit of a history of this. They canceled a football game at the last minute as well. Remember, it really pissed off Dabo Swinney. He was, Clemson had come to town to FSU for a game, and Florida State canceled it at the last minute the same way they did to Duke this time. Now, I'm not necessarily blaming Florida State. I totally get that they have to do the testing as late as possible to ensure players are clean, as close to game time as you possibly can. But there's just got to be, we got to figure out a better system than putting these players and the traveling party in danger by putting them on a plane and having them stay in a hotel for no reason. Coach K, I'm sure, is absolutely furious about this. And a piece of me wonders, when did FSU do their testing and how long did it take to get the test results back? Because I wouldn't be surprised if FSU did their testing like Friday morning and it took all day into the evening to get the test result back. And so by then it was too late and Duke had already traveled. And I wonder if is there a way the ACC can get better at this so teams aren't traveling to canceled locations, because we should restrict travel as much as possible.
They should be sequestering the players after their last, and the coaches after their most recent test before the game. So if the last test is going to be Thursday morning, quarantine them wherever the Florida State players are living, in their dorm rooms, in hotels, whatever it is. Just leave them there after their last test so that at least they haven't had any further contact since then. You don't have them in quarantine all the time. You may only have them for 1, 2, 3 days a week, but they have to do something, because as you said, Jason, it's a huge strain on everyone's resources and time to make this thing not work.
Well, it's dangerous. It's dangerous. That's the problem. Resources, time, yes, but it is dangerous. And that's the big concern.
And they played, was it Clemson on Tuesday night? So it's not like they've been sitting at home like us for a couple of weeks. They've been playing basketball. So between the Clemson game, where theoretically everyone was fine, and Friday, something happened, or even something may have happened before Clemson, because we all don't know how this virus works. It could be 2 days, it could be 14 days, it could be longer. So I think when it comes to this, is everyone has different standards. Jason, we talked about this on the last episode. Everyone having different standards is really killing this college basketball experience. And it makes it to a point not fun. There's times where we're sitting here and I'm talking to my best friends and we're like, this sucks. I know the players are preparing for this, but fans are doing it too. We're clearing our schedule because this is the one bit of excitement that we get every week because we're all at home in our various bubbles. And then that bubble is burst for all of us too. And that's what makes people lash out at the fact that Duke is doing certain testing and Louisville's doing another set of testing and Florida State's doing another set of testing. And the fact that even within a conference, you have 15 teams and 15 different testing procedures is asinine. And the fact that, again, I go back to the fact that no one's leading on this. So Coach K has to say something, and then Coach K gets vilified for saying something that probably is true. And no one wants to defend him on that. No one wants to back him up on it except for Duke people. And that really is disheartening. This whole thing is disheartening. We should be having standardized testing. We should have, hey, if this is this procedure, if you guys aren't following this procedure, you're not playing basketball. Duke women saw that. They opted out. And now you're seeing guys who have not played in 3 weeks, and only thing that people are talking about is Coach K is trying to sell out the season. I'm like, this is not happening, guys. Like, no one's really listening to anything beyond 6 inches from their face. And it really is disheartening. And it bursts the bubble for even us as we prepare to watch these games and talk about them. We have to come on here and talk about this.
Hey, Donald, I'm going to take over as host for a moment. I know that we have to take a commercial break, but after the break, I want to tell you guys, I think we learned something important about the Duke coaching staff as a result of this craziness that's going on. And I'm going to tell you about it after the break.
Okay, guys, we're back. We're still talking about basketball that's not playing, but before the break, Jason teased us about a little thing on the coaching staff that we need to consider when we're approaching all this. So, Jason, take it away.
Yeah. So the interesting thing that came out just before the game got canceled was that Coach K said he was in quarantine, and obviously we hope that he and Mickey are everything's gonna be fine. And I can't even tell you how worried I was when I first saw that news, but. The interesting thing to me that happened was they said Jon Scheyer will take over as acting head coach in Coach K's absence. I want to point out Nate James has actually been in the program longer than Jon Scheyer has. And we sort of didn't know between Jon and Nate, who was next up, so to speak. I don't feel like we had an answer to that. And I think we now have an answer. And it's worth pointing out, Coach K has missed games, I don't want to say regularly, but this is not an unusual thing to happen. He missed close to a month. Remember in 2017 with back surgery, Jeff Capel took over during that time. Capel took over when he missed the Georgia Tech game in 2016. And in 2018, he missed a game. He just was sick one day, and he missed a game against Wake. And again, Capel took over, but Capel's now gone. And so we didn't know who was sort of the next guy up. And I just think it's interesting and worth noting that Jon Scheyer was the guy that Coach K said will be the acting head coach. Again, even though Nate has been in the program longer.
Honestly, I'm not surprised at that, and it's not anything about the trajectory of Nate James. I think it has a lot to do with the trajectory of Jon Scheyer, and he's elevated up the ranks very quickly. He's a guy that, as we've talked about in the past, he's been looked at by different programs for him to take over their program at a certain point. He's remained at Duke so far. Nolan Smith is also a guy he interviewed with Memphis as an assistant coach in the offseason, decided to stay at Duke. Nate James has had, I think, a couple of assistant coach interviews as well. So the brand is strong when it comes to our assistant coaching tree and the Coach K coaching tree. But I will say in the past, like Scheyer has been taking a lot of those interviews that you see at halftime during the NCAA tournament that Coach K does not do, or even the ones during the regular season when he does them. It's Coach K, but if he doesn't have to do it, he usually delegates that to Jon Scheyer. We've seen Nate James on occasion do that, but so I'm not surprised at that. And I think the good thing is I think everyone within that coaching tree understands the who's in charge and who's in charge of what, and it would have been next man up, just like these guys were when they played here.
I'm not surprised that Jon Scheyer was sort of next in line because like Donald was saying, I feel like he's just gotten more hype as a future head coach, which is not to say that Nate James won't. It's just he may not want to or be ready for it yet.
So two other little things before we get done with all this. I want to point out, by the way, one of the crazy things about all these cancellations is Jalen Johnson isn't missing many games. Dude could be out for a whole month, and the only game that he might miss is the Notre Dame game. So I guess that's kind of a little bit of a silver lining in all this stuff. And last thing I wanted to ask you guys, in terms of the ACC, what do you think the ACC does if we have a truly unbalanced schedule in terms of picking out seedings. And by this, I mean, let's say that Duke is 8-2 and Clemson is 10-3. So Duke has a higher winning percentage because I think, by the way, I think teams, you're not going to get teams to play the same number of games. I can't imagine they're going to get all the games in. So if you don't play the same number of games, what if you do? Duke is 8-2, Clemson is 10-3. Duke has a higher winning percentage, but in terms of, wins and losses and such, Clemson's technically ahead because they have 2 more wins and only 1 more loss. So, if you look at the standings in the newspaper, Clemson would be a half a game ahead of Duke, technically. What do you think the ACC should do in one of these situations? And then the other part of this is, what should the ACC do if someone doesn't get to play everybody? You got to play 15 games to play everyone in the conference once. I think it's very possible that you're going to have teams that don't play each other in the conference. It's crazy.
So the haters are going to tell you that the ACC is going to follow the playbook from the Big Ten, and they're just going to vote Duke number 1 seed and everything, which if they do that, fine, I'll take it. But the honest answer is the ACC is going to do absolutely nothing about it. They are going to look at the standings. They're going to say, how does this work? You guys are 8-1. This team is, 15-2. 8-1 wins, and that's how they're going to do it, because they have not proven to be front runners when it comes to setting any kind of standard. And I think in the absence of any standard, they're just going to go with what's already out there.
It sucks. That's the long and short of it. There is not a good way to determine who is best in this situation. So whatever, you play the teams that are in front of you. I think that the best argument that like Ohio State has on getting into the college football playoff, and then they hammered it home yesterday by actually winning their game, but you play the teams that are in front of you. You can't affect the overall way the schedule is shaking out and the way that the cancellations are going. So win the games in front of you and you will get a better seat.
This would be the point where we say, okay, now that we're not playing this game tonight, let's preview the next game against Boston College. But we are smarter gentlemen than that. We have learned from the past. We are going to postpone that preview until early next week, maybe Monday or Tuesday. Look out for an episode from us on that, because we want to make sure this game gets played, and we want to take the weekend to kind of let this occur and see what comes out of it. But before we close, I did want to make a note on the women's basketball side. Duke women's basketball got a big deal transfer yesterday. Nia Green, who was the top 25 recruit in the class of 2019, announced that she is transferring from Louisville to Duke. Green announced that she was leaving Louisville back on December 16th. Is a very high-profile transfer. She is known for her ability to create open space off the ball and score. She was a highly touted recruit when she graduated. She redshirted 1 year and had been getting a little spot duty this year for the number 2 Louisville Cardinals. Jason, I go to you. I know you saw this news as well. What is your take on this? Again, I think this is one of the biggest recruits we've had on the Duke women's side in quite a while.
Yeah, and I think it's a sign of how Kara Lawson is going to be really successful at recruiting, at bringing in elite kind of players. That Kara has the kind of profile, the kind of personality that's going to be very attractive to them. Nia Green was a McDonald's All-American, and like you said, top 20, top 25 recruit, a really athletic guard who manufactures a lot of mid-range kind of game and uses her physical body to be able to get to the rim, which is something, I think she's going to be a scorer at the college level, which is something Duke sorely needs. It is really interesting that she redshirted for a year and then wasn't playing a ton for Louisville's a really good team and an experienced team. So she wasn't getting a lot of run for them. And, clearly, I guess it wasn't working out for her great at Louisville, which is why she's looking for greener pastures elsewhere. But there is no question with a recruit of this kind of profile that she was going to have a lot of suitors out there. And it's a big deal for Duke to have won this recruiting battle. We have fallen off in recruiting in recent years. I think it is really important that Kara is going to be able to point to Nia Green, and say, here is proof that top flight players who have women's pro potential, want to come and play for me.
Especially cool given that Duke was able to pull this off after having canceled their season, that players from other programs are interested in transferring in even with that decision making. Maybe she talked to other women on the team and realized that she thought the same way about either pandemic or the way things are going right now in general, to say, this is the group of people that I want to be with and I want to grow with over the next few years.
Yeah. And honestly, that is even more important to note, Sam, because she can play immediately. Remember, the NCAA has made it where all transfers are immediately eligible to play this year due to COVID. So she could have literally played immediately. And it's telling that she chose a program that has opted out of the season. And so she, even though she's eligible to play, she obviously won't begin playing for the Blue Devils until next season. So it's a really big get by Kara Lawson. It's a really big get for the program. And honestly, it's great to kind of see how that's going to shape up with, she has a whole semester to get to learn her new teammates and really get to work together. I'm pretty sure that the team is going to continue practicing. They're just not going to play. They're not going to, practice vigorously, but they still have the practice time afforded to them. So it's going to be great to get her into that mix. And that way, come next season, you have a team that's clicking on all cylinders and have gelled already and don't have to worry about the summer to get people acclimated to the process. They're bringing people in now. So great get by the program. And also, great that they are really going after this, even in the absence of not deciding not to play games. They're still continuing on to better the program and Kara putting her stamp on this program. And that will do it for episode 266 of the Duke Basketball Report podcast. Like I mentioned, we will be back early next week, probably Monday or Tuesday, to hopefully preview the Boston College game. And of course, if there's any news that drops over the weekend, we'll be all over that. But until then, don't forget to subscribe to the show wherever you get your podcasts. Send us emails. We got a nice one from my boy, Stefan Kretschmer, class of 04, the greatest class in Duke history, wishing us a happy 2021. And we extend the same wishes to you guys as well. But until next time, for Sam Klein and Jason Evans, I am Donald Wine. Thanks for listening, and Duke Band, take us home.